The church bells chimed 11, each resonating strike a mockery of what should have been the happiest moment of my life. I stood at the altar in my designer wedding dress, fighting the urge to check my phone again. My name is Lexi, and this was the day my world imploded. "Something's wrong," I whispered to Malik, who stood closest to me as my honorary man of honor. The gathered guests were starting to whisper, their murmurs echoing off the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. "I'm sure he's just stuck in traffic," Malik replied, but his face betrayed his concern. "Want me to call him again?" I nodded, watching as he stepped aside to make the call. My eyes scanned the crowded pews, noting the conspicuous absence of my mother, Josephine. She'd texted earlier claiming a migraine, saying she'd try to make it for the ceremony. Now her absence felt like a warning sign I should have heeded. The church doors burst open and my heart leaped, only to sink when I saw Brandon, our photographer, rushing in. "Sorry, got held up outside with—" He trailed off, his expression shifting from apologetic to alarmed. Before I could ask what was wrong, the doors swung open again. Tristan walked in, but not in his wedding suit. He wore jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, his face flushed and hair disheveled. Behind him stood my mother, wearing a red dress that seemed to mock the occasion. "Lexi," Tristan called out, his voice echoing through the now silent church. "I can't do this." I gripped my bouquet tighter, white roses crushing under my fingers. "What do you mean you can't do this?" He walked down the aisle, Josephine following close behind. The guests' heads swiveled between us like they were watching some twisted tennis match. "I've fallen in love with someone else," he announced, his voice steady and cruel. "I've been fighting it for months, but I can't deny it anymore." "Someone else?" The words felt like glass in my throat. That's when my mother stepped forward, linking her arm through Tristan's. "We never meant for this to happen, sweetheart." The church erupted in gasps and shocked exclamations. Aunt Simone jumped to her feet, pointing an accusing finger. "Josephine, how could you?" I stood frozen, my mind refusing to process the scene before me. My fiancé and my mother and my fiancé. The equation wouldn't compute. "How long?" I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady. 6 months, Tristan replied, having the audacity to look apologetic. "We tried to fight it, but—" "6 months?" I cut him off. "So when you were helping me pick out wedding invitations, when you were calling me princess and promising forever, when you were sleeping in my bed?" Josephine stepped forward. "Darling, sometimes these things just—" "Don't you dare call me darling," I snapped, finally finding my voice. "Don't you dare act like you're still my mother." Nina, my best friend and lawyer, was already on her feet, phone in hand. I could see her typing furiously, no doubt documenting everything. "Everyone out," I announced, my voice carrying across the stunned congregation. "Show's over. Thank you for coming to witness my mother and fiancé's betrayal. Please help yourself to the reception food. I hear karma goes well with wedding cake." As the guests began filing out, some offering awkward condolences, others just avoiding eye contact, Tristan tried one more time. "Lexi, we should talk about this privately." "Privately?" I laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "Like how you two kept your affair private? No, I think we're done here." I turned to leave, but Josephine grabbed my arm. "You're making a scene," she hissed. I yanked my arm free. "I'm making a scene? That's rich coming from the woman who just helped destroy her daughter's wedding." Malik stepped between us, his presence solid and protective. "I suggest you both leave. Now." They retreated, but not before Tristan called out, "I'll call you later to explain everything." "Don't bother," I replied, my voice ice cold. "I'm sure you'll be too busy with your new life. Just remember, karma's a bigger bitch than I am, and that's saying something." I walked out of the church with my head high, ignoring the pitying looks and whispers. In the bridal suite, I finally allowed myself to collapse onto a chair, my expensive dress pooling around me like broken dreams. My phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. Tristan's name flashed on the screen. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. "Hey, princess." His voice dripped with false sympathy. "I guess by now you know our little secret. Your mother and I, we're really happy. I hope someday you'll understand that you can't fight true love. Maybe this is for the best. You were always a bit too career-focused anyway. Your mother gets me in a way you never could." I ended the message, a cold clarity washing over me. They thought they'd broken me, but they'd just awakened something far more dangerous. My desire for revenge. and I was going to make sure they both regretted the day they decided to betray me. 2 months before the wedding disaster, I first noticed something was off. Tristan had left his laptop open while showering, and a notification popped up from my mother. Delete these messages after reading. I shouldn't have looked, but something in my gut screamed that I had to. The messages made my blood run cold. Last night was amazing, my mother had written, but we need to be more careful. Lexi's getting suspicious about your late meetings. I quickly forwarded the messages to my email, my hands shaking. Then I closed everything, making it appear untouched. That night, I bought 3 hidden cameras and a voice recorder. "You're not crazy," Malik assured me a week later as we sat in his apartment, reviewing the footage I'd collected. "Look at this." The video showed Tristan and my mother in our kitchen, speaking in hushed tones while I was supposedly at work. Their bodies were too close, their touches lingering too long. "I need more evidence," I said, gripping my coffee mug so tight my knuckles turned white. "Something concrete." "You could just confront them," Malik suggested, but his tone indicated he knew I wouldn't. "No, I need to understand how deep this goes." I pulled out my laptop. "Help me access the family trust account?" Malik, being the family's unofficial tech expert, took less than 5 minutes to break in. What we found made me physically ill. "Holy shit," he breathed, scrolling through the transactions. "Tristan's been transferring money from the trust to a private account for months, and look who authorized it." My mother's digital signature was on every transfer. $200,000, I whispered. "They've been stealing from the family trust while planning their affair." "This is way bigger than just cheating," Malik said, taking screenshots. "This is fraud." A text lit up my phone. "Tristan, working late tonight, princess. Don't wait up." I showed Malik the message, and he immediately grabbed his car keys. Let's see exactly what kind of work he's doing. We followed Tristan's car to an upscale restaurant across town. Through the window, we could see him and my mother in a private booth, looking very much like lovers enjoying a romantic dinner. "Record everything," I instructed Malik, who was already filming with his phone. "What's your plan?" he asked as we watched them share a dessert, their fingers intertwining on the table. "I'm going to let them think they're winning," I replied, my voice steady despite the nausea in my stomach. "They want to play happy couple? Fine. Let them plan their betrayal while I plan something better." Over the next few weeks, I became the perfect, unsuspecting bride-to-be. I gushed over flower arrangements with my mother, asked Tristan's opinion on honeymoon destinations, and played my part flawlessly. Meanwhile, I gathered evidence: bank statements, photos, videos, recordings, every secret meeting, every stolen kiss, every manipulated financial document. "You're scary good at this," Nina commented one evening as I showed her the growing file of evidence. "But are you sure you want to wait? We could stop the wedding now." I shook my head. They need to feel the humiliation I feel. Everyone needs to see who they really are. "The financial fraud alone could put them both in serious legal trouble," Nina mused, reviewing the documents. "Add in the breach of fiduciary duty since your mother's a trustee. I want them to lose everything," I said coldly. "Their reputation, their money, their dignity, just like they're taking everything from me." The day before the wedding, I got my final piece of evidence. I'd accidentally left my phone recording in my mother's study during the rehearsal dinner. "Tomorrow's going to be difficult," Tristan's voice played through my earphones as I listened later that night. "But once it's done, we'll be free." "Are you sure you want to do it this way?" my mother asked. "We could just tell her privately." "No," Tristan replied firmly. "She needs to understand she never really had me. Public humiliation will keep her from fighting back. You know how she is, always trying to control everything." "You're right," my mother agreed. "And once we're together openly, we can access the rest of the trust fund. I've already spoken to the lawyers about removing her as a beneficiary." I stopped the recording, my hands steady as I added it to my evidence file. They thought tomorrow would be their triumph, their grand revelation of true love conquering all. They had no idea I'd been 10 steps ahead of them the entire time. "Everything's ready," I texted Malik. "Tomorrow they'll learn what real humiliation feels like." His response came quickly. "I've got your back. Time to show them who they're really dealing with." I closed my laptop and smiled. Tomorrow they thought they were destroying my wedding. Instead, they were walking straight into my trap. The day after the wedding disaster, I sat in Nina's office, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents. My wedding dress hung like a ghost in its garment bag against the wall. They've already started moving more money, Nina said, tapping her keyboard. Another 50,000 transferred this morning. They're getting sloppy, I replied, scrolling through my phone. Probably think I'm too devastated to notice. Nina leaned forward, her expression serious. We need to move fast. I can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the trust assets, but... A knock interrupted us. Aunt Simone walked in, carrying a worn leather briefcase. I have something you need to see. She pulled out a stack of yellowed papers and spread them across Nina's desk. Your mother has a history of this behavior. 25 years ago, she did the same thing to my best friend, seduced her husband, stole their savings, and disappeared for 2 years. What? I grabbed one of the documents. It was a police report detailing financial fraud allegations against my mother. The charges were dropped, Simone explained, because your grandfather paid everyone off to avoid a scandal. That's when she met your father. Nina was already scanning the documents. This establishes a pattern of behavior. We can use this. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. We need to talk. Come to the house tonight, just us. Don't go, Simone warned. She'll try to manipulate you. No, I said, showing them the message. This is perfect. I'll wear a wire. Nina pulled out a small recording device from her desk. Use this. It's more reliable than a phone. That evening, I walked into my childhood home. My mother sat in her favorite armchair, looking perfectly composed in an expensive silk blouse. Darling, she started, I know you're hurt. Save it, I cut her off, sitting across from her. What do you want? I want you to understand. Tristan and I, we didn't plan this. Sometimes love just happens. I laughed bitterly. Love? Is that what you call embezzling money from the family trust? Her face paled slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. $250,000, Mother. That's how much you and Tristan have stolen so far. Want to explain that? She stood up, her composure cracking. You've been spying on us? Like you've been betraying me? Funny how that works. Listen carefully, she hissed, her maternal mask slipping completely. If you pursue this, you'll regret it. I'm still a trustee. One signature from me and you'll lose everything. I smiled, touching the recording device hidden under my shirt. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Back off, Lexi, you can't win this. You know what's interesting? I stood up, matching her stance. You're so focused on the money, you haven't even apologized for sleeping with my fiancé. He never loved you, she spat. You were just convenient, a way to get close to the family money. We've been laughing about it for months. Perfect. Got it all on tape. Goodbye, Mother, I said calmly, walking toward the door. See you in court. You ungrateful little... She grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. The front door opened and Brandon walked in, camera raised. Everything okay here, Lexi? My mother released me immediately, her face morphing into fake concern. Brandon, I didn't realize you were coming by. Just documenting everything, he said smoothly, still filming. For posterity. Back at Nina's office, we played the recordings. Simone shook her head in disgust. She hasn't changed at all. This is gold, Nina said, making notes. The threats, the admission of fraud, the physical assault, all on record. My phone buzzed again. A letter had been delivered to my apartment. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery. Dear Lexi, drop this now. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Don't force me to destroy you completely. Love, Mom. I handed the letter to Nina. Add it to the evidence pile. We need to move fast, she said, reaching for her phone. I'm calling Judge Martinez for an emergency hearing. What's our next step? I asked. Nina smiled grimly. We're going to hit them where it hurts most, their reputation. Brandon's connections at the newspaper will help with that. They thought I was weak, I said, looking at the threatening letter. They thought I would just cry and give up. Simone squeezed my shoulder. They forgot whose daughter you really are, your father's, and he taught you to fight. I nodded, feeling stronger than I had in days. Time to show them exactly what I'm capable of. Brandon's article hit the front page of the city's largest newspaper on a Sunday morning. The headline read, Mother of the Bride Runs Off with Groom, a story of betrayal, fraud, and family destruction. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Malik was first. Have you seen it? It's everywhere. Social media is blowing up. I was already on my laptop, watching the story spread like wildfire. Brandon had done an incredible job, presenting the evidence methodically while painting a devastating picture of betrayal. "Look at the comments," Nina said when she called. "People are furious. Your mother's social circle is imploding." I scrolled through hundreds of responses. "This is disgusting. How could a mother do this to her own daughter?" "I know these people. Never shopping at their business again." "The financial fraud allegations are shocking. Where are the authorities?" By noon, local TV stations were picking up the story. I watched from my apartment as reporters camped outside my mother's house, waiting for comment. "They're at Tristan's office too," Brandon reported, sending me live footage. "He tried to leave through the back door, but they caught him. Want to see him running to his car?" The video showed Tristan, disheveled and panicked, pushing through reporters while they shouted questions. "Mr. Kent, did you plan to humiliate your fiancée at the altar? Is it true you've been embezzling from the family trust? How long were you sleeping with your future mother-in-law?" My phone buzzed with a text from Tristan. "What have you done? This is insane. Call them off." I replied with a screenshot of his gloating voicemail from the wedding day. "Karma's funny that way." The doorbell rang. It was Nina with a stack of papers. "The judge granted our emergency injunction. The trust is frozen. They can't touch another penny." "How are they taking it?" "Your mother's lawyer called 3 times already. They're desperate to settle." I shook my head. "No settlements. I want this to play out in public court." My laptop pinged with an email notification. It was from my father's sister in Europe. "Just saw the news. Your mother did the same thing to our family 20 years ago. I have documents to prove it. Want them?" "Forward everything to Nina," I replied immediately. More messages poured in. Old friends of my mother's, former business associates, even her college roommate. Each had a story, a warning, a piece of evidence showing her pattern of destruction. "You've started an avalanche," Malik said, bringing over lunch. "Look at this." He showed me a social media post from one of my mother's closest friends. After 15 years of friendship, I'm horrified to learn the truth about Josephine. To all the families she's destroyed. I'm so sorry I didn't see it sooner. The post had thousands of shares. Brandon called again. "Local business groups are distancing themselves. Your mother's been asked to resign from 3 charity boards already." "What about Tristan's firm?" I asked. "They've put him on indefinite leave. Clients are threatening to pull their accounts." My doorbell rang again. This time it was a young woman I'd never met. "I'm Rachel," she said nervously. "Your mother and my ex-husband. 3 years ago. I never had proof, but seeing your story..." I invited her in, recording her testimony as she described an identical pattern. The seduction, the gaslighting, the financial manipulation. "I lost everything," Rachel said, wiping tears. "I thought I was crazy. Thank you for exposing them." By evening, Justice for Lexi was trending locally. People gathered outside my mother's house with signs, "Shame on you," and "Money can't buy morals." Tristan tried calling again. I let it go to voicemail. "Please, Lexi, this is destroying us. We'll return the money. We'll do anything. Just call off the media." I forwarded the voicemail to Nina. More evidence of guilt. "Your story's been picked up by national news," Brandon reported. "They want interviews." "Set them up," I agreed. "It's time everyone knew the truth." My phone lit up with another text, this time from my mother. "You think you've won? Watch your back. This isn't over." I showed the message to Nina, who added it to our growing file of threats. "She's right about one thing," I said, watching more news vans arrive outside my mother's house. "This isn't over, it's just beginning." "Are you ready for what comes next?" Malik asked. "Once we go to court, everything will be public record." I looked at Rachel, still sharing her story of betrayal, then at the growing media circus outside, and finally at the stack of evidence on my coffee table. "I'm ready," I said firmly. They wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone. Now everyone will see exactly who they really are. The news anchor on TV announced, "Coming up, the wedding scandal that exposed a pattern of fraud and betrayal. Stay tuned for exclusive details." I smiled. The truth was finally coming out, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters as Nina and I made our way inside. My mother and Tristan had already arrived, huddled with their lawyers in the corner of the courtroom. "Ready?" Nina whispered, organizing our evidence files. I nodded, keeping my eyes forward. My mother wore her favorite victim outfit, modest navy dress, pearls, minimal makeup. Tristan looked exhausted, his designer suit wrinkled. "All rise." The bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. "Your Honor," my mother's lawyer began, "we'd like to propose a settlement." "No," Nina interrupted firmly. "My client declines any settlement offers. We want this on record." The judge nodded. "Proceed with your opening statement, counselor." Nina stood, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. This case is about more than a broken engagement. It's about systematic fraud, betrayal, and the deliberate destruction of a family for financial gain. She played the recording from my mother's house. The threat about disinheriting me echoed through the courtroom. My mother's face tightened. "Ms. Sullivan," the judge addressed my mother, "are you denying that's your voice?" "Your Honor," my mother stood, tears ready. "I was emotional. My daughter was threatening." "Please answer the question," Judge Martinez interrupted. "No, I don't deny it." Nina projected bank statements onto the courtroom screen. These transfers, totaling over $250,000, were made to an offshore account. Both defendants' signatures are clearly visible. Tristan's lawyer jumped up. "We can explain those transfers." "Please do." Nina smiled. "Explain why a trustee and her daughter's fiancé were secretly moving money during their affair." The evidence mounted: emails, photos, voice recordings. Rachel testified about her similar experience, followed by two other women with parallel stories about my mother. "Your Honor," my mother interrupted, standing suddenly. "I'd like to address the court." Judge Martinez nodded. "Proceed." "Lexi, honey." She turned to me, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm your mother. Everything I did was for love. Can't you understand that? We're family." "Family?" I stood, ignoring Nina's warning hand. "Was it family love when you seduced my fiancé? Family loyalty when you stole my inheritance? Family pride when you planned to humiliate me at my own wedding?" "Ms. Sullivan," the judge warned, but I continued. "You want to talk about family? Let's talk about Rachel's family and the others. How many families have you destroyed, Mother?" "Objection," her lawyer called. "I have evidence." Nina interjected, pulling out more files. 3 more cases of similar behavior, spanning 20 years. Affidavits from victims, police reports, bank records. "This is a witch hunt," Tristan suddenly shouted, his composure breaking. "We're in love. Yes, we took the money, but we deserve—" "Mr. Kent," Judge Martinez's voice cut like steel. "Are you admitting to fraud?" The color drained from Tristan's face as his lawyer grabbed his arm. "Your Honor," Nina smiled, "I believe that's a confession." My mother stood again, her mask cracking. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you—" "Mrs. Sullivan," the judge slammed her gavel. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt." The proceedings continued. Nina presented evidence of their planned betrayal, the calculated timing of the wedding humiliation, the systematic draining of funds. "The defense's actions show clear malicious intent," Nina concluded. "We ask for full financial restitution, punitive damages, and a restraining order against both defendants." Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence silently. The courtroom held its breath. "Given the overwhelming evidence and Mr. Kent's admission of fraud," she began, "I'm granting the plaintiff's requests in full. Additionally, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for potential criminal charges." My mother collapsed into her chair. Tristan looked like he might vomit. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Mrs. Sullivan is removed as trustee, effective immediately. The trust will be frozen pending a full audit." "Your Honor, please." My mother tried one last time. "Mrs. Sullivan, you've demonstrated a pattern of predatory behavior spanning decades. This court finds your actions particularly egregious given the betrayal of your own daughter. Your fortunate criminal charges weren't filed years ago." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. "How does it feel to win?" "What's next for your mother and Mr. Kent?" "Will you press criminal charges?" Nina handled the press while I walked to my car, where Malik waited. "You did it," he said, hugging me. My phone buzzed. A text from Tristan. "Please, can we talk? I've lost everything." I showed Malik the message. "Karma's funny that way." He quoted my earlier words. Another message came, this time from Rachel. "Thank you for giving us all justice. You've inspired so many people." I looked back at the courthouse where my mother was being hounded by reporters, her perfect image finally shattered. "Let's go," I told Malik. "I think we're done here." But as we drove away, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of their downfall. My father's call came late that night. "I'm outside your apartment," he said, his voice heavy. "Can we talk?" I found him sitting in his car, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Hey, Dad." "I watched the court footage," he said as I slid into the passenger seat. I had no idea about any of it. "I know. 20 years, Lexi. 20 years of marriage, and I never saw who she really was." I reached for his hand. "She fooled everyone." "Not you," he said quietly. "You saw through her. You fought back." He pulled out a thick manila envelope. "There's something you need to see." Inside were documents dating back to before I was born. Bank statements, letters, photographs, all showing a pattern of manipulation and deceit spanning my mother's entire adult life. "I found these in her study after the wedding," he explained. "She's been doing this for decades. Different names, different cities, but always the same pattern." "Why didn't you bring these to court?" "Because," he hesitated, "some of these implicate powerful people. People who paid to keep her quiet. I needed to be sure you were ready for what might come next." My phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. "Major development. Turn on Channel 7 now." I pulled up the news on my phone. The headline made my breath catch. "Wedding scandal mother linked to prominent businessman's disappearance." "That's why I'm here," my father said, watching the report. "They're reopening the case of Robert Walsh's disappearance from 15 years ago. Your mother was the last person to see him alive." "What?" "She was having an affair with him. He vanished 2 days after threatening to expose her schemes." A knock on the car window made us both jump. It was Nina. "Sorry to interrupt," she said when I rolled down the window. "But we have a situation. Your mother's trying to leave the country." "What?" "Airport security stopped her an hour ago. She had fake passports and over $50,000 in cash." My father's face hardened. "She's running, just like before." "There's more," Nina continued. "Tristan's agreed to testify against her. He's telling everything." My phone lit up with another message, this time from my mother. "Meet me. 1 hour, the old boathouse. Come alone or everything burns." "Don't go," my father and Nina said simultaneously. "She's desperate," I replied, showing them the message. "Which means she's dangerous." "Then we do this smart," Nina said, already dialing. "I'm calling Detective Rodriguez." An hour later, I approached the boathouse wearing a wire, with police hidden nearby. My mother stood by the water, still in her court outfit. "I knew you'd come," she said without turning around. "What do you want?" She finally faced me, her expression eerily calm. "Did you ever wonder why your father's business suddenly succeeded 20 years ago?" "What are you talking about?" "Robert Walsh didn't just disappear," she smiled coldly. "He made a significant investment first. Your comfortable childhood, your trust fund, all built on secrets I've kept." "Are you threatening Dad now?" "I'm offering you a choice. Drop everything, the charges, the investigation, all of it, and these documents stay buried." She patted her handbag. "Or watch your father go down with me." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She pulled out a file. "Your father's signature is on every document. He knew, Lexi. He always knew." I stepped closer, seeing the papers in the dim light. They looked authentic. "You really are a monster," I whispered. "I'm a survivor," she corrected. "Something you clearly inherited. So, what's it going to be? Your revenge or your father's freedom?" I reached for the file. As soon as she released it, Detective Rodriguez emerged from the shadows. "Josephine Sullivan, you're under arrest for attempted extortion and flight risk." "You wore a wire?" she hissed at me. "My own daughter?" "I learned from the best," I replied, watching as they handcuffed her. "By the way, Dad's already talking to the FBI. Has been for weeks. Those documents, they'll make great evidence." Her face contorted with rage as they led her away. "This isn't over." "Actually," I called after her, "it is. And Mom, orange is definitely not your color." Later, reviewing the recording with Nina and my father, I felt strangely empty. "You okay?" Nina asked. "She was ready to destroy everyone," I said, "even her own family." My father squeezed my shoulder. "But she didn't count on you being stronger than her." My phone buzzed with a news alert. "Socialite arrested. New evidence in cold case. What happens now? I asked. Now, Nina smiled grimly. We make sure she never hurts another family again. The weight of the evidence file felt heavy in my hands. It wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about justice for everyone she'd ever hurt. The final court session felt like a circus. News vans clogged the streets, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, victims, and curious onlookers. All rise. The bailiff called as Judge Martinez entered. My mother sat at the defendant's table, wearing prison orange instead of her designer clothes. Tristan was beside her, but they wouldn't even look at each other now. Before we proceed, Judge Martinez began. The court has received Mr. Kent's testimony and cooperation agreement. Tristan stood, his voice shaking. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Lexi publicly. What we did was cruel and calculated. Mrs. Sullivan, she manipulated me, but I was willing to be manipulated. The money, the thrill of secrecy, I lost myself. Save the performance, I muttered, but Nina shushed me. Furthermore, he continued, I can confirm that Mrs. Sullivan confessed to me about Robert Walsh. She bragged about it one night after too much wine, said he was, quote, just another man who underestimated her. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My mother's lawyer jumped up to object, but she waved him down. If I'm going down, she announced, standing, I'm doing it my way. She turned to face the gallery. Yes, I took advantage of weak men and their money. Yes, I engineered situations for my benefit. And yes, Robert Walsh threatened to expose me, so I handled it. I've spent my entire life watching men take what they want. I simply learned to play their game better. Mrs. Sullivan, the judge warned, are you confessing to Mr. Walsh's disappearance? She smiled coldly. I'm confessing that men like Robert Walsh, like Tristan here, like all of them, they see what they want to see. A helpless woman, a seductress, a victim. I gave them their fantasy while taking everything they had. And your daughter? Judge Martinez asked. Was she just another mark? For the first time, my mother's composure cracked. Lexi was supposed to understand. She's my daughter. She has my blood, my instincts. Instead, she chose to be weak like her father. Weak? I stood up, ignoring Nina's attempt to stop me. I exposed you. I brought you down. How is that weak? You could have joined me, she hissed. We could have been unstoppable together. Instead, you chose justice. She spat the word like poison. Order! Judge Martinez slammed her gavel. Mrs. Sullivan, you've just confessed to multiple felonies in open court. Do you understand that? I understand that I'm done pretending, she replied. Done playing the repentant mother, the misunderstood woman. You want to send me to prison? Fine. But remember, everything I did because men made it easy. They wanted to believe the lies. The judge shuffled her papers. Given the defendant's confession and the overwhelming evidence, this court sentences Josephine Sullivan to 25 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy in the disappearance of Robert Walsh. Mr. Kent, in light of your cooperation, you are sentenced to 5 years with possibility of parole. As the bailiffs approached, my mother turned to me one last time. You think this is victory? Watch your back, daughter. You're more like me than you know. No, I replied firmly. I'm nothing like you. I chose truth over lies, justice over revenge. Time will tell. She smiled as they led her away. Blood always tells. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Lexi, how does it feel to see justice served? Any comments on your mother's confession? What about Mr. Kent's apology? Brandon pushed through the crowd with his camera. Exclusive statement for the paper? I looked at Nina, who nodded encouragingly. My mother spent her life destroying families for profit and pleasure, I said into the microphones. Today isn't about revenge. It's about justice for every life she ruined, every person she betrayed, every family she tore apart. What's next for you? Someone shouted. Healing, I replied honestly, and helping others heal too. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. You did it. You gave us all closure. Thank you. More messages flooded in from other victims, sharing their relief and gratitude. Malik appeared at my side. Ready to go? As we walked away, Tristan called out from the prisoner transport van. Lexi, wait. Please. I really am sorry. I paused, turning to face him. Save your apologies, Tristan. You chose your path. I loved you. he tried. In the beginning, I really did. No, I replied calmly. You loved what I represented. Money, status, an easy life. You never loved me. But thank you. For what? For showing me exactly what I don't want in my life. Lies, manipulation, betrayal. Goodbye, Tristan. As we drove away, Nina reviewed the day's events. The DA wants to talk to you about helping with other cases like this. Apparently, there's a whole task force forming. I watched the courthouse disappear in the rearview mirror. Tell them I'm in. It's time to turn this pain into purpose. Your mother was wrong, you know, Malik said quietly. You're nothing like her. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. No, I'm not. I'm better. The support group filled the community center's main room. Women and men of all ages sat in a circle, their faces reflecting a familiar mix of pain and determination. My name is Lexi, I began, standing before them. And like many of you, I was betrayed by someone I trusted completely. A woman in her 40s raised her hand. I saw you on the news. Your mother. She's the reason I'm here. Your story gave me courage to face my own situation. That's why we're all here, I replied, to turn our pain into power. Nina slipped into the room, giving me a subtle nod. I knew what that meant. The task force had made another arrest based on our work. After the session, Rachel approached me. Remember when I first came to you during the trial? I was broken, ashamed. Now I'm helping others rebuild their lives. You did that yourself, I smiled. I just showed you it was possible. My phone buzzed. A message from the prison chaplain. Your mother's requesting to see you again. Delete, I muttered, hitting the button. She'd been sending requests weekly since her sentencing. Still not ready? Rachel asked, seeing my expression. I don't need her version of closure, I replied. I found my own. Brandon burst through the door, waving his phone. Lexi, Tristan's giving a full interview from prison. He's naming names, exposing other scams. Your mother's entire network is crumbling. I pulled up the article on my phone. Tristan's confession was comprehensive, detailing how my mother had built her web of manipulation over decades. Look at the comments, Brandon pointed. Hundreds of people sharing similar stories, finding connections, offering support. Ms. Sullivan, a young intern from the DA's office, appeared. We've found 3 more cases matching your mother's pattern. The task force needs your insight. Send me the files, I nodded. I'll review them tonight. Malik arrived as the room cleared out. Ready for dinner? Dad's waiting at the restaurant. Actually, I said, I need to make one stop first. We drove to the cemetery where Robert Walsh's family had placed a memorial stone. His daughter stood there, placing fresh flowers. Sarah, I called softly. I'm Lexi. She turned, recognition flooding her face. I've been wanting to meet you. Your mother's confession. It finally gave us answers. I'm so sorry for what she did. Don't be, Sarah said firmly. You exposed the truth. That's more than anyone else ever did. Back in the car, Malik watched me carefully. You okay? Better than okay, I replied. For the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. At the restaurant, my father waited with Nina and Brandon. A small celebration for another successful prosecution of one of my mother's former accomplices. To justice, Nina raised her glass. To healing, Rachel added, joining us. To family, my father said, squeezing my hand. The real kind. My phone lit up with another prison notification. This time it was from Tristan. I know you'll never forgive me, but thank you for showing me how to make things right. I showed the message to the table. Are you going to respond? Brandon asked. No need, I replied. His actions can speak for themselves now. Speaking of actions, Nina pulled out a folder. The governor's office called. They want you to head a statewide task force on financial fraud and family abuse cases. They want me? I asked, surprised. Who better? My father said proudly. You turned personal tragedy into a mission to help others. You're not just surviving anymore, you're leading. A notification popped up on everyone's phones simultaneously. Breaking news about my mother's case leading to international fraud investigations. Your mother wanted to create a legacy of destruction, Malik observed. Instead, she created a daughter who's rebuilding everything she tried to break. We're rebuilding, I corrected, looking around the table at my chosen family. All of us. Sarah joined us, pulling up a chair. Room for one more? Always room for healing hearts. I smiled. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from the prison chaplain. Your mother asked me to tell you she's proud of what you've become. Should I relay your response? I typed quickly. Tell her thank you. She taught me exactly what kind of person I never want to be. That's the greatest gift she could have given me. Looking around the table at these faces, friends, family, fellow survivors, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because we'd transformed it into purpose. So, Nina raised her glass again. What's next? I smiled, thinking of all the people still needing help, still fighting their own battles against betrayal and abuse. We keep going, I replied. We keep helping, we keep healing, together. The glasses clinked, and in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. My beginning. Our beginning.
My name is Kimberly, and this is my story. I grew up in a small town, went to the local high school, and that's where I met Jason. He was this tall, charming guy, always the center of attention. We were both just teenagers, but it felt like love at first sight. We started dating, and before we knew it, we were inseparable. We got married when we were just 20. Looking back, we were too young and naive, but at the time, it seemed like the perfect fairy tale. Jason was always the fun-loving, carefree type. He had big dreams and a bigger personality. I was more grounded, focused on building a stable future. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. Not long after we got married, I found out I was pregnant with our daughter, Lily. It was a surprise, but a welcome one. Jason was over the moon, and for a while, it felt like we were on top of the world. We were this young couple, excited about starting a family and building a life together. But as time went on, cracks started to show. Jason's carefree attitude started to feel more like irresponsibility. He was always chasing the next big thing, never satisfied with what he had. Meanwhile, I was working hard, trying to keep everything together for Lily's sake. I could see he loved her, but he was more interested in his own adventures than in being a responsible father. One evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down with Jason in the living room. I needed to talk to him about his spending habits and lack of focus. It was a conversation I had been dreading, but it had to be done. Jason, we need to talk, I started, trying to keep my voice calm. What's up, Kim? He asked, not taking his eyes off the TV. I'm worried about how we're handling things, I said. We need to be more responsible, especially with Lily in the picture now. Jason shook his head. You're always worrying about the future. Why can't we just enjoy the present? Because the present is a mess, Jason, I shouted back. We're barely making ends meet, and you're out there buying new gadgets and talking about trips we can't afford. A few weeks later, after another argument about his latest impulse buy, I made the decision to end our marriage. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing for Lily and me. I wanted her to have a stable, predictable life, not one filled with uncertainty and broken promises. The next few weeks were tough. Jason moved out, and I started the process of filing for divorce. He wasn't happy about it, but he eventually agreed to joint custody and to pay child support. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Raising Lily on my own was challenging, but it was also rewarding. She was my world, and I was determined to give her the best life possible. I found a job that allowed me to provide for us, and slowly, we settled into our new routine. Over time, Jason and I found a way to be civil with each other. He would visit Lily occasionally, and he always made sure to send the child support on time. For that, I was grateful. It wasn't the life I had imagined when we first got married, but it was a life that worked for us. Lily had just turned 18, and we were celebrating her acceptance into law school. It was a big deal for both of us. She'd worked so hard, and I was incredibly proud. I decided to have a special dinner to mark the occasion, and for the first time in a long while, I invited Jason, her father, to join us. When I called him, he sounded genuinely pleased to be invited. Hey, Jason, it's Kimberly. I'm planning a dinner for Lily. She got into law school, and I thought it'd be nice if you came, I said, trying to keep it casual. Kimberly, that's great news. I'll be there, he said, and we hung up. The night of the dinner, I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to be perfect for Lily. I'd prepared her favorite dishes and set the table nicely. When Jason arrived, he looked surprisingly good, dressed in a crisp shirt and slacks, carrying a small gift. Lily came down the stairs, beaming when she saw her dad. "Dad, you made it." "Of course, I wouldn't miss it for the world," Jason said, hugging her tightly. "And I brought you a little something." Lily tore open the wrapping to find a brand new smartphone. "Wow, Dad, this is amazing. Thank you," she exclaimed, her face lighting up. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation flowed easily. Jason talked about his new job and his big house. He seemed to be doing well, and I was glad for Lily's sake. "So, Kimberly, you haven't changed a bit," Jason said, looking at me across the table. I smiled awkwardly. "Thanks, Jason. You seem to be doing well." "Yeah, things are good. Got a great job, nice house, life's treating me well," he replied, clearly proud of himself. After dinner, Lily announced she was going out to celebrate with her friends. "Thanks for the dinner, Mom. And Dad, the phone is awesome. I'll see you both later," she said, giving us both hugs before dashing out the door. Jason and I were left alone, the house suddenly feeling very quiet. I started clearing the table, and he stood up to help. We worked in silence for a while, the familiar routine of washing and drying dishes bringing back memories of our life together. After a while, Jason broke the silence. "Kimberly, I've been thinking a lot lately," he said, his tone serious. "About what?" I asked, not looking up from the sink. "About us. About Lily. About everything, really," he said, setting down the dish he was drying. "I miss what we had. I miss you. I want to try again." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions. "Jason, we have a lot of history, and not all of it's good." "Why now?" "Because I've realized what I lost. I want to be a better man for you, for Lily," he said, his voice earnest. I hesitated, my mind racing with memories of our past and thoughts of what the future might hold. "All right, Jason. Let's take it slow, see where it goes." A smile spread across his face. "Thank you, Kimberly. You won't regret this." We finished the dishes in a comfortable silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. It felt strange, but also a little exciting, the possibility of starting over. As the night went on, we talked more, sharing stories and laughing about old times. Getting back with Jason was a big decision, but I decided to give it a try. We got married again, just a simple ceremony at the city hall. Only Lily and Jason's older sister, Margaret, were there. It was a small, quiet event, nothing fancy. I hoped this time things would be different. Moving into Jason's big house felt strange at first. It was so different from my small, cozy place. The house was huge, with lots of rooms and big windows. Jason seemed happy to have me there, and for a while, things felt good. I started decorating, trying to make the place feel like home. Lily came home for a visit a few days later. She was thrilled to see us together again. We sat in the living room, catching up on her life at college. "So, how's law school treating you?" Jason asked, looking proud. "It's tough, but I love it. I'm learning so much," Lily replied, her eyes shining with excitement. "I'm glad to hear that, kiddo. You're gonna be a great lawyer," Jason said, patting her shoulder. "Thanks, Dad. It's good to see you both together again," Lily said, looking at us with a smile. After Lily left, Jason and I sat on the couch, talking about our plans. We talked about traveling, maybe taking a trip to the mountains. It felt good to plan things together again. But as time went on, I noticed Jason wasn't putting money into our joint account. I asked him about it one night while we were having dinner. "Jason, I've noticed you haven't been putting money into our account. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. He looked up from his plate, looking a bit annoyed. I've had some money problems, Kimberly. I'm working on it. Money problems? You didn't mention anything about that before. What's going on? I pressed, feeling a bit uneasy. I didn't want to worry you. It's nothing big, just a few things I need to sort out, he said, looking away. As the months went by, I noticed Jason buying new gadgets and posting pictures of expensive cars on social media. It started to bother me, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I hoped he would get his act together. One day, I was cleaning the house when I found a receipt for a luxury car rental in Jason's jacket pocket. I felt my heart sink. I decided to confront him about it that evening. Jason, can we talk? I said, holding up the receipt when he walked in. What's this? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked at the receipt and then back at me. It's just a rental, Kimberly. No big deal. No big deal? Jason, we're supposed to be saving money, not spending it on luxury cars. I said, feeling my frustration rising. I work hard, Kimberly. I deserve to enjoy my money, he replied, his tone defensive. I get that, but we need to be smart about this. We have bills to pay, I said, trying to keep calm. I'm handling it, okay? You don't need to worry about it, he said, brushing me off. As the days went on, I noticed more signs of Jason's spending. New gadgets, fancy clothes, and more car rentals. I tried talking to him about it, but he always brushed me off, saying he had it under control. For 2 years, I tried to talk to Jason about saving money and managing our budget better. He never listened. Every time I brought it up, he'd brush me off, saying he had everything under control. But he didn't. Our bank account was always running low, and he kept buying new gadgets and renting flashy cars. He posted videos of himself with these expensive toys on social media, making everyone think we were living the high life. Friends would comment on how lucky I was, but they had no idea how hard it was to keep everything together. Jason's spending was getting out of hand. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Our joint account was barely enough to cover bills, and he was flaunting new gadgets and expensive clothes. I decided to confront him seriously this time. Jason, we need to talk, I said, walking into the living room where he was lounging with his tablet. Can't it wait, Kimberly? I'm in the middle of something, he replied, not looking up. No, it can't wait. This is important, I said, my voice firm. I found another receipt for a luxury car rental. We can't keep doing this, Jason. We're running out of money. We're barely getting by, and you're spending like we're millionaires. I work hard, Kimberly. I deserve to treat myself, he said, looking annoyed. Treating yourself is one thing, but this is out of control. We're drowning here, I replied, feeling my frustration rise. Stop exaggerating. We're fine. I've got it covered, he said, dismissing my concerns. No, Jason, you don't. You're acting like a spoiled kid, not a responsible adult, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. He got up, glaring at me. I don't need a lecture from you, Kimberly. I know what I'm doing. He stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, shaking with anger. I couldn't keep doing this. Something had to change. I kept hoping Jason would change, that he'd finally see reason and start acting more responsibly. But it only got worse. Each month, I'd find more receipts for gadgets and rentals. I felt like I was drowning, trying to make ends meet while he spent money like it was going out of style. It was like he hadn't changed at all since our first breakup. The man I hoped had grown up was still the same carefree guy who didn't think about tomorrow. One day, I got a call from my brother. Our mother had died. She lived in the same city where Lily was studying. The news hit me hard. I told Jason, and we decided to take the train to say goodbye. It was a long, silent journey. I was lost in my thoughts, trying to process the loss. When we arrived, Lily was there to meet us. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. We hugged tightly, finding some comfort in being together. The farewell was modest, just close family. My brother and I did what needed to be done without any fuss or luxury. It was what Mom would have wanted. During the service, I looked around and realized Jason wasn't there. I felt a pang of worry and turned to Lily. "Have you seen your father?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head, looking just as confused. "No, Mom. I haven't seen him since we got here." I felt a knot in my stomach, a mix of worry and frustration. This was typical of Jason, disappearing when I needed him most. But I pushed those feelings aside, focusing on saying goodbye to my mother. Jason came up to me only after the ceremony was over. I was very tired, so I didn't ask him where he had been all this time. After the funeral, we gathered at my mother's house for the will reading. It was just me, my brother Tom, Lily, Jason, and a few close relatives. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, a longtime family friend, opened the envelope and pulled out a few sheets of paper. "To my daughter, Kimberly, I leave the house and all its contents," Mr. Harris read aloud. "To my son, Tom, I leave my savings and any remaining assets." I felt a lump in my throat. The house was a big responsibility, but I was grateful. It was full of memories, a place where I could still feel my mother's presence. I looked over at Tom, who was nodding, seemingly okay with the arrangement. Suddenly, Jason, who had been silent until now, stood up. "We need to sell the house. It's too much for Kimberly to handle on her own," he said, his tone more demanding than concerned. I stared at him, shocked. "Jason, what are you talking about?" "We just heard the will. The house is mine." "Exactly. It's your house, so we should sell it and split the money," Jason insisted, his face flushed with frustration. "No way, Dad," Lily interjected, her voice firm. "I lived here with Grandma while I was in college. I plan to keep living here." Jason waved her off. "Lily, this is between the adults. Kimberly, we need to be practical about this." "Practical? You're talking about selling my mother's house like it's just another asset," I said, feeling my anger rising. "It is an asset, Kimberly. And as your husband, I have a say in what happens with it," Jason shot back, crossing his arms. Lily stood up, glaring at her father. "Dad, I'm studying law, remember? Inherited property isn't shared between spouses. You don't get a say in this." Jason's face turned red with anger. "Don't talk to me like that, young lady. This is a family decision, and I'm part of this family." Then he turned to me. "If you don't sell the house, I'll divorce you." The room fell silent. All eyes were on us. I could see the shock and confusion on my relatives' faces. I took a step back, feeling a mix of anger and betrayal. "Fine, Jason. We'll talk about it when we get home," I said, my voice cold and steady. We left early the next morning, taking the train back home. Jason was quiet the whole way, his anger simmering just below the surface. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media to distract myself. That's when I saw it, a video Jason had posted. In the video, he was standing in front of a lavish funeral setup, talking about how close he was to my mother and how much he was suffering. The comments were filled with sympathy, and the video had over 1 million views. I felt a wave of anger and disbelief. He wasn't at my mother's funeral because he was at another funeral across the cemetery, filming himself against the background of the coffin of a rich businessman. I couldn't believe how hypocritical and deceitful he was. Without looking up, I said, "Jason, you're in for a surprise when we get home." He looked at me, a smug smile on his face. "So, you've decided to sell? Good. We'll make a nice chunk of change. I'm thinking of getting a new car with the money." I just shook my head, sadly, not saying another word. The train ride felt endless, my mind racing with anger and disappointment. When we got back to Jason's house, there was a surprise waiting for him, his older sister, Margaret, sitting at the dining table. I had called her in advance and asked her to come over for this conversation. The moment Jason saw her, he froze, his confident demeanor vanished. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" Jason asked, his voice trembling a bit. Margaret looked at him sternly. "I'm here because Kimberly called me. We need to have a serious talk, Jason. Sit down." Jason hesitated, then slowly walked over and sat down across from her, looking nervous. I could see the fear in his eyes. I took a deep breath, ready to lay everything out on the table. "Margaret, I need to tell you what's been going on," I began, my voice steady. "Jason has been spending excessively on gadgets and car rentals. He's been demanding that I sell my mother's house and even threatened me with divorce if I didn't agree." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she turned to Jason. "Is this true, Jason?" Jason looked down, not meeting her gaze. "It's not as bad as she's making it sound, Margaret." "Not as bad?" I snapped. "You've been wasting money left and right and trying to bully me into selling my mother's house. That's pretty bad, Jason." Margaret shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. "Jason, you haven't grown up at all. You're still acting like a child. You've never achieved anything on your own." Jason looked up, a mix of anger and shame on his face. "That's not fair, Margaret. I've tried my best." "Your best?" Margaret scoffed. "The house you're living in isn't even yours. It's mine. I let you live here because I felt sorry for you. And now I find out you've been wasting money and bullying Kimberly?" Jason's face turned pale. "Margaret, I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." "Out of hand?" Margaret repeated, her voice cold. "You've been living off my generosity and trying to push Kimberly around. And do you know what else? I've been paying Lily's child support, not you. You couldn't even be bothered to take care of your own daughter. You should be grateful to God for having a wife like Kimberly. You don't deserve her." I felt tears welling up in my eyes at Margaret's words. I turned to Jason, my voice trembling with emotion. "Jason, the house should go to Lily. She's an adult now, and it's her legacy." Jason suddenly jumped up, his face red with anger. "I don't give a damn about Lily. I want half the money from the sale of that house, or else I want a divorce." The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "You don't care about your own daughter? Fine, Jason." I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared earlier. I handed them to him, my hands shaking. "Here are the divorce papers. Sign them." Jason's hands trembled as he reluctantly signed the papers. "You're making a big mistake, Kimberly." "No, Jason. The mistake was thinking you'd ever change," I said, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. Jason finished signing and then bolted out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, feeling a mix of exhaustion and liberation. Margaret walked over to me, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Kimberly, thank you for everything you've done for my brother. And you've got Lily. You'll get through this." After the divorce, I packed up and moved back to the city where I grew up. It felt good to be back in my mother's house, surrounded by familiar memories. The house needed some work, but it was home. It was a place where I could start fresh. Lily graduated from college not long after. She married a wonderful guy, and now she's expecting a baby. I'm excited to become a grandmother. Life was starting to feel settled and peaceful, something I hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, I was in the garden, pulling weeds, when my phone rang. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered it, seeing Jason's name on the screen. "Hello?" I said, already feeling a knot in my stomach. "Kimberly, it's Jason. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice sounding desperate. "What do you want, Jason?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm in big trouble, Kimberly. I've got debts piling up, and I need your help," he blurted out. "No, Jason. I'm not giving you any money," I said firmly. "But Kimberly, I need you. We could try again, make things right this time, he said, his voice almost begging. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want to get married again? Are you out of your mind? Come on, Kimberly. We had good times too. We can start over, he said, trying to sound convincing. Jason, we're done. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. I'm not marrying you again, and I'm definitely not giving you money, I said, feeling my anger rise. He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd want to help me. I've helped you enough, Jason. It's time you stand on your own 2 feet, I replied, my voice cold. Fine, Kimberly. I see how it is, he said, his voice turning bitter. Goodbye, Jason, I said, and hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. I had finally closed that chapter of my life for good. Jason's problems were no longer my problems, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I went back to my gardening, feeling more at peace than I had in years. I was ready to focus on my future, on my daughter, and on the new grandchild that was on the way. I was done looking back. It was time to embrace the life ahead of me, with all its possibilities. Hey, I'm Emma. I work from home as a web designer and life's been pretty good. My parents left me a decent inheritance, and I've been pretty stable financially. My best friend, Lily, is a bit of a character. She's all about astrology and is always reading star charts and horoscopes. I've never really bought into it, but she swears by it. One day, Lily comes over, all excited. Emma, you have to see this, she says, waving some papers around. What's got you so hyped? I ask, rolling my eyes a bit. I did your natal chart and found your perfect match. His name is Matt, and he's absolutely your soulmate, she says, eyes sparkling. I couldn't help but laugh. Alright, fine. I'll meet him. But if he's a weirdo, you owe me a drink. Deal, she grins, clapping her hands. So, Lily arranges a meetup. I'm feeling a bit skeptical, but curious. When I finally meet Matt, he turns out to be surprisingly normal. Tall, dark hair, a nice smile, nothing like the disaster I'd pictured. Hey, I'm Matt, he says, extending his hand. Emma, so, you're into astrology too? I ask, trying to make conversation. He laughs, shaking his head. Not really. Lily wouldn't stop bugging me about this, so I figured why not? I chuckle. Same here. I was half expecting some crystal ball guy. We end up talking for hours. Turns out, we have a lot in common. We both love hiking, we're into the same movies, and we even like the same weird food combinations. I'm starting to think maybe there's something to this astrology thing after all. A few days later, we're texting nonstop. Matt seems genuinely interested in getting to know me. He asks about my work, my hobbies, and my family. We keep seeing each other, and things get serious pretty fast. Matt is kind, funny, and seems genuinely interested in me. One night, after a cozy dinner at his place, he takes my hand. Emma, I know it's only been a few months, but I feel really connected to you. I don't want to rush things, but I can't see myself with anyone else, he says, looking into my eyes. I feel a flutter in my chest. I feel the same way, Matt. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. A few weeks later, we're officially a couple. Lily is over the moon. I told you the stars don't lie, she exclaims when I tell her. As time goes on, Matt and I get closer. We start talking about the future, and he brings up the idea of me moving in with him. It feels right, so I agree. We're happy, and for once, everything feels perfect. Matt had convinced me that investing my inheritance in our home was better than stocks. Life had been pretty smooth after I paid off his $200,000 mortgage. With the leftover money, I gave the house a facelift, new furniture, a fresh coat of paint, the works. We were settling in nicely. One afternoon, Matt's phone rang, and he answered it, looking concerned. "Mom? What's going on?" I could hear his mom's frantic voice on the other end, though I couldn't make out the words. Okay, calm down. We'll be there as soon as we can," Matt said, hanging up the phone. He turned to me, his face pale. "Dad's had a stroke. He's paralyzed on his left side. We need to go, Emma." We packed quickly and hit the road. The drive was tense, with Matt gripping the wheel, barely saying a word. When we arrived at his parents' house, the place was in chaos. Susan, his mom, was in tears, and her back was acting up. "Matt, Emma, thank God you're here," Susan cried out, her face streaked with tears. "Your father, he can't move or talk, and my sciatica. I can't do anything." After a long, exhausting visit to the hospital, we got the details. George, Matt's dad, was in bad shape. He couldn't move his left side and couldn't speak. It was heartbreaking to see him like that. Back at the house, we needed a plan. "We should think about a care facility," I suggested. "They can provide the best care for George." "No. He doesn't want that. He wants to be at home," Susan snapped, looking furious. I tried to keep my voice steady. "All right, what about hiring a nurse then? Someone who can be here around the clock." Susan shook her head, her eyes filling with tears again. "We can't afford that. We're running out of money." Matt looked at me, clearly pleadingly. "Emma, we have to do something. Mom can't handle this alone." I sighed, feeling the weight of the situation. "I can stay here for a while and help out. I work from home, so I can manage. It's not ideal, but we'll make it work." The next day, Matt and I set up a room for George downstairs, so he didn't have to deal with stairs. Susan was hovering, barking out instructions and complaints. "This bed is too small. How is he supposed to be comfortable in this?" she grumbled. "It's what we have right now, Susan. We'll find something better soon," I said, my patience wearing thin. Finally, we got George settled in and comfortable. It was a relief to see him resting, even though he couldn't express it. The next morning, Matt had to head back to our city for work. Once Matt left, reality hit hard. But I was determined to help George recover and support the family, no matter how hard it got. Living with Matt's parents was a real grind. Susan's sciatica had her stuck in her chair, leaving me to take care of George and the whole house. She didn't lift a finger and always had something to complain about. Nothing I did seemed good enough for her. "Emma, this soup is too salty," Susan grumbled one evening as I served dinner. "It's the same recipe I always use, Susan," I replied, trying to keep my cool. "Doesn't look like it. And you're always on that computer. You should be taking care of us, not just sitting around," she added, her tone sharp. I took a deep breath. "I'm working, Susan. I need to keep my job to help with the expenses here." "Work? It looks like you're just goofing off on that thing," she muttered, rolling her eyes. I swallowed my frustration and went to check on George. He couldn't speak, but his eyes followed me, showing a silent gratitude. It was tough seeing him like this, but I was determined to help him improve. "I'll give you a massage now, George," I said softly, setting up the massage table. He blinked slowly, a small sign that he understood. I had recently finished a course in massage therapy to better care for him. As I worked on his muscles, I noticed he seemed to relax a bit. It was the only time he looked somewhat comfortable. A couple of months passed this way. Every day was a struggle to balance work and caregiving, with Susan's constant complaints in the background. Finally, after months of this routine, Susan's sciatica improved enough that she decided to visit Matt for a few months. "Emma, I'm going to stay with Matt for a while. I need a break from this place," she announced one morning. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. "That's great, Susan. I'm sure it will be good for you." As she packed her bags, I couldn't help but feel a sense of freedom creeping in. It would be just George and me, and I could finally set my own routine without her constant nagging. The day Susan left, I felt like I could breathe again. I went to George's room, and he gave me a look that said more than words ever could. "It's just us now, George. We're going to make some real progress," I said, smiling at him. He blinked slowly, and I knew he was on board. With Susan out of the house, life became a lot more manageable. I set up a solid routine for George and me. Every morning, I'd start by helping him with his exercises. I'd lift his legs and arms, encouraging him to move as much as he could. I'd then move on to massaging his muscles, something I'd learned from my recent therapy course. "This will help with the stiffness, George. Just hang in there," I'd tell him, working through the knots and tight spots. The days were long, but without Susan's constant nagging, I could focus better. My web design work became my escape, a few hours a day where I could lose myself in creativity. One afternoon, as I was setting up for George's therapy, I noticed something different. His fingers were twitching slightly. "Hey, George, can you try moving your fingers for me?" I asked, holding my breath. Slowly, very slowly, his fingers curled a bit. It wasn't much, but it was the first movement I'd seen in weeks. I felt a rush of excitement. "That's great, George. Keep going, just like that," I encouraged him. His eyes lit up with a spark of hope. From that day on, we worked even harder. Every little twitch, every small movement was a victory. I started incorporating more exercises, pushing George to do a bit more each day. The weeks passed, and George's improvement was steady. One day, as I was helping him stand, he managed to take a step with some support. "Look at you, George. You're walking," I exclaimed, almost jumping with joy. Our daily routines became more rigorous. We'd walk a few steps every day, and George's confidence grew with each one. His strength was returning, slowly but surely. One evening, after a particularly good session, I decided to sit down and have a chat with him. "George, you're really making amazing progress. How are you feeling about all this?" I asked, sitting next to him. He took a deep breath and managed to say, "Better, thanks, Emma." Hearing him speak, even if just a few words, was like music to my ears. "You're welcome, George. We're a team, and we're going to get through this together," I replied, feeling a lump in my throat. As the months rolled on, George continued to improve. He was now able to move around the room with some assistance, and could feed himself with a bit of help. Our bond grew stronger through this journey. We shared more conversations, even if they were simple and slow. "George, you're really a fighter. I'm so proud of you," I said one morning as we sat in the garden, enjoying the fresh air. "Couldn't do it without you," he replied, his words clearer than before. We both sat there, enjoying the moment. It felt good to see him reclaiming parts of his life that had seemed lost forever. His spirit was strong, and his determination was inspiring. Over time, George and I grew very close. He started calling me his daughter, which warmed my heart. One day, we were sitting in the garden, enjoying the sunshine, when I decided to ask something that had been on my mind. "George, why didn't you want to go to a nursing home when you got sick?" I asked gently, looking into his eyes. He looked surprised. "Never said no," he replied slowly. "Saved money for good place." I was taken aback. "But Susan said you didn't want to go, and that there wasn't any money for it." George frowned, a serious look crossing his face. "Didn't know that," he said, his voice firm despite the struggle to speak. "We'll figure out." After months away, I decided to surprise Matt with a visit home. I was excited, thinking about how happy he'd be to see me. I packed my bags, said a quick goodbye to George, and hit the road. The drive felt longer than usual, my mind racing with thoughts of reuniting with Matt. When I finally pulled into our driveway, it was already dark. I grabbed my bags and walked up to the front door, but something felt off. My key didn't fit the lock. Confused, I tried again, but it was no use. I rang the doorbell, hoping Matt would answer and this would all make sense. A woman I didn't recognize opened the door. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking puzzled. "I'm Emma, Matt's wife. This is my house. Who are you?" I replied, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. "I'm Karen. This house was sold a couple of months ago. I'm just here to keep an eye on it," she shot back. My mind went blank for a second. "Sold? That's impossible. This is my home." "I'm sorry, but it's not anymore," she said, looking genuinely sorry. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling. I dialed Matt's number, my heart racing. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Emma. What's up?" he said, his voice sounding oddly calm. "Matt, I'm at our house, and some woman says it's been sold." "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He sighed, a cold edge in his voice. "Yeah, I sold the house. I bought a new one for Mom and me." "What? You sold our house without telling me? Where am I supposed to go?" I shouted, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "There's no place for you in the new house, Emma. I sent the divorce papers. Didn't you get them?" he replied, his tone icy. I felt like the ground was falling away beneath me. "Divorce papers? Are you serious, Matt? I paid off your damn mortgage. How could you do this to me?" He laughed, a cruel sound. "You can't prove any of that. The house was in my name. It's over, Emma. Move on." Tears stung my eyes as I tried to process his words. "What about your father? Who's taking care of him?" "Dad? He's not my problem anymore. Mom and I don't need him dragging us down. If you want to play nurse, take him." "I don't care," Matt said coldly, hanging up the phone. I stood in the parking lot of what used to be my home, the darkness surrounding me, feeling utterly lost. My conversation with Matt had left me dumbfounded. I couldn't believe he had sold our house, abandoned his father, and sent me divorce papers without a second thought. My phone buzzed, jolting me out of my daze. It was George. "Emma, come back. Need to talk," George said, his voice weak but urgent. "I'm coming, George. I'll be there soon," I replied, my voice shaking. I got into my car and drove through the night, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and confusion. By the time I reached George's place, it was early morning. Exhausted, I walked through the door and saw George waiting for me, his eyes filled with concern. "George, I don't know what to do," I stammered, feeling the tears welling up. I couldn't hold it in any longer and burst into tears right on his shoulder. He led me to the living room and helped me sit down. "Tell me, what happened?" he said, looking at me with those kind eyes. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Matt sold the house, George. He said there's no place for me and that he doesn't care about you either. He sent me divorce papers." George's face hardened, a rare show of anger. I knew they were up to no good. "What do you mean, George?" I asked, wiping my tears. "After my stroke, couldn't speak, they talked, in front of me," he began, his voice trembling with the effort. "What did they say?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. "They planned everything. Told me they'd get your money, sell house, kick you out," George said, his eyes filled with pain. I stared at him in horror. They actually said that? How could they be so cruel? Thought I couldn't understand. But I did, he continued, his voice getting stronger. They also wanted to get rid of me. Sell my house. Tears streamed down my face as I listened. I can't believe they'd do this to their own family. George took a deep breath. "I've taken care of everything." "What do you mean?" I asked, looking at him, confused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys, handing them to me. "I bought Matt's house. It's yours now." I looked at the keys, then back at George, feeling a wave of emotion. "You did this for me? Why?" "Because you deserve it. You paid for it. Not them," he said firmly. I burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of happiness and relief. "Thank you, George. I don't know what to say." As I sat there, holding the keys to my new home, I felt a mix of gratitude and determination. George had given me a second chance, and I was not going to let Matt and Susan's betrayal break me. We were going to fight back, and we were going to win. Together. The next day, George decided it was time to make things official. He called a lawyer to the house to change his will. "Emma, need you to be the heir," George said, looking determined. "Are you sure, George?" I asked, feeling a mix of gratitude and concern. "Yes, it's right. You took care of me, not them," he replied, his voice steady despite his condition. The lawyer arrived, and we sat down at the kitchen table. George explained his wishes, and the lawyer nodded, drafting the new will. I felt a lump in my throat as George signed the papers, making me the sole heir to all his property. A few days later, I met with Jack again, bringing all the documents and evidence we had gathered. Jack was impressed with the thoroughness of our preparation. "Emma, this is solid. We've got everything we need to go after Matt and Susan," he said confidently. "I'm ready to fight, Jack. Let's get that $200,000 back," I replied, feeling a surge of determination. Jack filed the lawsuit, demanding the return of my money. We also provided evidence from the bank, with witnesses confirming the transfer of funds. It was a strong case, and I felt hopeful about our chances. A few days later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Matt and Susan standing there, looking desperate. "Emma, we need to talk," Matt said, his voice shaky. I crossed my arms, glaring at them. "What do you want?" "Please, Emma, we're sorry. We didn't mean for things to go this far," Susan said, her voice trembling. "Sorry? You two planned this from the start. You lied, stole my money, and tried to kick me out," I shot back, feeling my anger rise. "Emma, please, let's work something out. We don't want to go to court," Matt pleaded, his face pale. I shook my head, my voice cold. "I don't want anything to do with people like you. And by the way, George has recovered and transferred all his property to me. You two are left with nothing." Matt's face turned ghostly white, and Susan's eyes widened in shock. She fainted right there on my doorstep. Matt just stood there, speechless. "Get her out of here, Matt. I don't have time for your games," I said, pointing towards their car. He nodded, still in shock, and dragged Susan to the car. As they drove away, I felt a strange sense of closure. A few weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. I was awarded the $200,000, and the divorce was finalized. It was a long, hard battle, but I had won. I drove back to George's house, feeling lighter than I had in months. As I walked in, George looked up, his eyes full of curiosity. "How did it go?" "We won, George. I got the money back, and the divorce is final," I said, tears of joy streaming down my face. We sat together in the living room, the weight of the past months lifting off our shoulders. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where we could finally find peace and happiness. Life had settled into a peaceful routine after all the chaos. I lived in my own house now, and George was a regular part of my life, like the father who passed away early and whom I hardly remember. We spent our days tending to the garden, chatting about old times, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was nice to have this calm after the storm. One sunny afternoon, as I was sipping coffee on the porch, my phone rang. It was Lily, my astrologer friend, who had introduced me to Matt. "Hey, Emma. You won't believe what I've found in your chart this time." Lily's voice was bubbling with excitement. I chuckled, already guessing where this was headed. "Oh boy, what is it now, Lily?" "You've got a new love coming your way. He's perfect for you, even better than the last one. The stars don't lie," she said, practically squealing with joy. I burst out laughing, shaking my head. "Lily, after everything that happened, I think I've had my fill of horoscope-based romances. But Emma, this one is different. The alignment is just right. You've got to trust me on this, she insisted. Lily, I appreciate it, but I'm focusing on myself for now. If Mr. Perfect is out there, he'll find me without the stars' help, I replied, feeling more amused than annoyed. After hanging up, I couldn't help but laugh at the whole conversation. Despite everything, Lily's enthusiasm was infectious. But I knew I was in no rush to jump into anything new. I was content with my life as it was. George wheeled himself onto the porch, looking curious. Who was that? Lily. She's trying to set me up with another perfect match from the stars, I said, rolling my eyes playfully. George chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Stars didn't work so well last time. Exactly. I told her I'm done with horoscope dates. I've got enough on my plate without adding a new guy into the mix, I replied, grinning. You'll find someone when the time's right, George said, giving me a knowing look. I looked out at our garden, feeling a deep sense of contentment. The flowers were blooming, and the vegetables were coming along nicely. It was a little paradise we had created together. You know, George, this is all I need right now. A simple life, good company, and a bit of sunshine, I said, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. Perfect life, he agreed, smiling. A few days later, I got another call from Lily, but this time it was just a chat. No horoscope predictions, no matchmaking, just catching up like old friends. It felt good to keep things light and easy. One evening, as I was watering the garden, I thought about what the future might hold. I knew that someday, I'd meet someone who would appreciate me for who I am, without needing the stars to tell us we were meant to be. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, casting a warm glow on the backyard. Laughter and chatter filled the air as I weaved through the throng of people, a plate piled high with canapes threatening to topple over at any moment. It was Sarah's birthday party, and the usual suspects were there, my college friends, most of them still single and clinging fiercely to their independence. Me? I was the anomaly, the one already sporting a hefty rock on my left ring finger. Hey stranger! A voice boomed behind me. I turned to see Sarah, her blonde curls bouncing as she hugged me tightly. Where have you been hiding? Just dodging social butterflies, I laughed, gesturing to the overflowing plate. Happy birthday, by the way. You look stunning. Thanks, she beamed, her eyes sparkling. So, where's Mr. Perfect? Ah, Michael. Even his name sounded perfect. He was the reason for my early exit from the single life. We'd met just a few months ago at another friend's gathering, and let me tell you, it was like something out of a cheesy romance novel. We locked eyes across the room, the music faded away, and suddenly, it was just the two of us. Hey, he said, a confident smile playing on his lips. I don't think we've met. I'm Michael. I'm Paloma, I replied, feeling a flutter in my stomach. Nice to meet you. That night, we talked for hours about everything and nothing. He was unlike any guy I'd ever met. At 27, he already had a clear vision for his future, a career, a family, the whole package. It was refreshing, a stark contrast to the commitment-phobic Peter Pan surrounding me. I want kids, he declared at one point, his gaze intense. A whole bunch of them. And I wouldn't mind changing a single diaper. My heart skipped a beat. Kids were a non-negotiable for me too. Growing up as an only child, I'd always dreamed of a house filled with laughter and the chaos of little ones. Me too, I whispered, a genuine smile spreading across my face. And that was it. We were on the same page, a rare find in the murky waters of dating. Our relationship blossomed quickly. Dates turned into weekend getaways, which turned into movie nights curled up on his couch. Michael introduced me to his family, a close-knit bunch who welcomed me with open arms. His mom, Martha, was particularly warm. Family is everything, Paloma, she'd say, her eyes twinkling. A woman's place is with her children, nurturing them, helping them grow. I couldn't help but agree. A year later, Michael got down on one knee, a simple diamond ring glinting under the park lights. Tears welled up in my eyes as I whispered yes. Our wedding was small but beautiful, surrounded by loved ones. After the honeymoon, reality set in. Michael, ever practical, suggested I stay home and focus on creating a loving environment for the future little ones we desperately wanted. Think of it as an investment, he'd say, squeezing my hand. I'll be the breadwinner. You focus on becoming the best damn mom ever. 6 months flew by in a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, cravings for pickles and ice cream at 3 in the morning, and endless baby name debates. Michael was ecstatic. He practically announced our pregnancy to everyone we met, booming. Paloma's knocked up. We're gonna have a little heir. The way he phrased it always rubbed me a little wrong, this emphasis on an heir. But I brushed it off, focusing on the miracle growing inside me. Finally, the big day arrived. Hours of pushing, a symphony of screams, mine and the baby's, I might add, and then, silence. A tiny hand, wrinkled and perfect, grasped my finger. Relief washed over me, so intense it almost hurt. It's a girl, the doctor announced, her voice filled with warmth. A beat of silence followed. Then, Michael lumbered over, his face a mask of disappointment. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, exhausted and exhilarated, cradling our beautiful daughter, and all Michael could muster was a look like he'd lost his favorite team's championship game. A girl, huh, he finally mumbled, his voice devoid of any excitement. Well, there's always next time for a boy, right? My heart sank. Next time? He shrugged, his gaze flickering away from our daughter, nestled in my arms. Yeah, you know. We gotta have an heir, gotta carry on the family name. I forced a smile. We have an heir, I said gently, nudging him towards the baby. Look at her, Michael. She's perfect. He gave a half-hearted nod, but his eyes remained distant. Thankfully, my in-laws were a different story. Martha, the moment she laid eyes on her granddaughter, Emily, practically went into grandma overdrive. She fussed over her, cooed at her, and showered her with tiny clothes and stuffed animals. A little princess, she declared, beaming. Just what this family needs. Michael's initial coldness towards Emily persisted. He'd hold her awkwardly, his gaze often straying to some unseen point in the distance. He'd make comments like, such a delicate flower, gotta handle her with kid gloves. Or shame she can't be a little rough and tumble like a boy. Each remark chipped away at my joy. Was it wrong of me to want my husband to love our daughter, regardless of her gender? But a year later, when the doctors confirmed I wouldn't be able to have any more children due to health complications, the truth became undeniable. Michael's disappointment morphed into something darker, a constant undercurrent of resentment that permeated our lives. 8 years melted away like ice cream on a hot summer day. Emily, my little miracle, blossomed into a vibrant, independent child. At 8 years old, she possessed a mind sharper than a chef's knife. Gadgets were her toys, French flowed from her lips like a babbling brook, and her culinary skills could put most adults to shame. Just last week, she'd whipped up a 3-course French feast for Martha and George, her grandparents. They sat there, eyes wide and taste buds tingling, as Emily proudly presented each dish. Emily, this is incredible! Martha exclaimed, dabbing her lips with a napkin. You're a natural. George, a man of few words, simply grunted his approval, but the twinkle in his eye spoke volumes. That same week, she brought home another trophy, this one for the most delicious homemade dish at a junior high school competition. Michael remained unfazed. He muttered a half-hearted congratulations and disappeared into the den, the usual refuge he sought whenever Emily's achievements threatened to steal the spotlight. One evening, as Emily built an elaborate Lego castle on the living room floor, tears welled up in her big brown eyes. Mommy, she sniffled, her lower lip trembling. Why doesn't Daddy ever seem happy about my stuff? My heart ached. This wasn't new. Michael's indifference towards Emily had been a thorn in my side for years. I always brushed it off, telling myself he just wasn't good at expressing affection. But seeing the confusion cloud Emily's bright eyes, a fierce protectiveness surged through me. "Hey, sweetie," I knelt beside her, pulling her into a hug. "Don't you worry about that. Your dad loves you very much, he just doesn't know how to show it." That night, after Emily drifted off to sleep, I confronted Michael. He was sprawled on the couch, flipping through sports channels, a beer balanced precariously on the coffee table. "Michael," I said, my voice tight with frustration, "we need to talk about Emily. She came to me today, crying. She feels like you don't love her because you never seem happy about anything she does." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and defensiveness. "Look," he said, his voice gruff. "I do my best, okay? I pay the bills, put a roof over her head. Isn't that enough? She craves your approval, your support. The least you can do is pretend to be interested," I said, my voice trembling with anger. Michael sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to fill the room. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll try. But don't expect miracles." The following days, a strained effort of communication settled between Michael and Emily. He'd ask her about school, albeit with a forced politeness that made me cringe. But it was like watching a bear trying to waltz. Months blurred one into another. Michael's attempts at forced father-daughter bonding had dwindled, replaced by a distant politeness. But a new, unsettling change had emerged: his late nights. He started trickling in after dark, reeking of cologne that wasn't mine. His excuses were flimsy excuses: work meetings running late, traffic jams on the freeway. Each explanation felt like a slap in the face. One evening, as the clock ticked past midnight and Emily was long asleep, I decided to confront him. He stumbled through the door, a tired but smug smirk plastered on his face. "There you are," I said, my voice tight with suppressed anger. "Where have you been? Emily's been asking about you all night." He shot me a condescending look. "Look, honey," he drawled, the irritation in his voice clear. "I bring home the bacon, all right? You sit here all day. What do you know about the real world?" My jaw clenched. This was the man who'd insisted I become a housewife. Now, he had the audacity to throw it back in my face? The following days were a tense dance of silence and simmering resentments. Michael retreated further, spending more and more time away from home. He even started dressing differently, trendier clothes, a cocky swagger that grated on my nerves. Even his hairstyle had changed, a youthful cut that seemed designed to shade years off his face. "Going for a new look, huh?" I remarked one morning, unable to contain my curiosity. He flashed me a toothy grin, the kind he never used on me anymore. "Work thing," he mumbled, avoiding my gaze. The lie hung heavy in the air. One day, Emily practically skipped into the house, a wide grin plastered on her face and a crumpled piece of paper clutched in her hand. "Mommy, guess what?" she chirped, bouncing on the balls of her feet. My heart swelled with pride. My little genius had a knack for collecting achievements. This time, what was it? Another coding competition win? A perfect score on a science test? "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, kneeling before her and taking the paper. "I won the school's Mind Games championship," she declared, her voice brimming with excitement. "They said I'm the smartest kid in my grade." I whooped with joy, engulfing her in a tight hug. "That's amazing, Emily. I knew you could do it." This victory deserved a celebration. But what? A fancy dinner? A trip to the amusement park? Those options felt lame for a mind as brilliant as Emily's. Then, an idea struck me. That afternoon, after Emily finished her coding class, yes, at 8 years old, I surprised her with a sleek, brand new smartphone. Her eyes widened in astonishment as she unwrapped the box. "Mommy, a phone? For me?" "For you," I confirmed, a smile tugging at my lips. "You've worked so hard, and I think this could be a great way for you to explore your interests even more." She took the phone, her fingers tracing the smooth surface with a sense of reverence. Within minutes, she'd figured out how to navigate it, taking photos, editing them with built-in filters, and even downloading a few educational apps. "Thank you, Mommy. This is the best gift ever," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. A pang of guilt twinged at my heart. Michael constantly harped on about me spoiling Emily. He wouldn't approve of this, not one bit. But the joy on Emily's face silenced that voice. "Just promise me one thing, okay?" I said, holding her gaze. "Don't tell Daddy about the phone. He might get mad." Emily, ever the loyal daughter, nodded earnestly. "My lips are sealed, Mommy. This is our little secret." A week later, a glimmer of hope, faint as a firefly in the night, flickered in our strained household. Michael, for the first time since his late-night habits began, initiated a conversation about Emily. Not just a disinterested, "How was school?" but a genuine attempt to connect. "Hey, Em," he said one evening, tossing a worn baseball cap onto the table. "How'd you like to go on a camping trip with me this weekend? Just us two. We can roast marshmallows, tell scary stories by the campfire." Emily's eyes lit up like Christmas lights. "Really? With just you and me?" "Yeah," Michael confirmed, a hint of awkwardness in his voice. "Figured it's about time we bonded, you and your old man." A knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. The thought of Emily venturing into the wilderness with Michael, who wouldn't know a compass from a colander, sent shivers down my spine. "But Dad," Emily interjected, a frown creasing her brow. "What about bears and stuff? Aren't there, like, wild animals in the mountains?" Michael chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Don't worry, kiddo. I'll protect you from any bears or wolves that come sniffing around." My heart pounded in my chest. This whole camping trip felt like a terrible idea. Yet, seeing the excitement sparkling in Emily's eyes, the words died in my throat. That weekend, they packed their backpacks, a nervous flutter in my stomach battling with a sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this trip would be the bridge they needed to build a stronger relationship. Sunday evening rolled around, a leaden gray settling over the sky, mirroring the dread growing in my chest. Michael stumbled through the door alone, his face etched with a desperate weariness. "Paloma," he croaked, his voice hoarse. I need to tell you something. It's Emily, I lost her." The world tilted on its axis. "Lost her?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean you lost her?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "We were hiking in the mountains, and she wandered off. I called for her, searched everywhere, but..." Fury surged through me, hot and blinding. "And you just came home now? Why didn't you call the police?" I was scared," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "Scared they'd think..." "Think what?" I roared, my voice laced with a terrifying calm. "That you're a neglectful father who lost his own daughter." Tears streamed down his face, but they did little to extinguish the inferno raging within me. "I'm calling the police," I declared, grabbing the phone. "They can start searching right away." A frantic phone call later, sirens wailed in the distance, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. My in-laws arrived, their faces etched with concern, but their words did little to penetrate the fog of terror blanketing my mind. The agonizing wait dragged on, each tick of the clock an eternity. Michael sat huddled on the couch, his phone clutched in his hand, his gaze glued to the screen. My blood pressure soared as I watched him, a detached calmness masking a simmering rage. This wasn't worry, not genuine concern. It was something else entirely. A jolt of electricity shot through me. Emily. Her phone. Emily's phone. I screamed, the realization dawning on me like a slap in the face. She has a phone with GPS. Michael's face drained of color. His phone clattered to the floor, the screen displaying a text conversation filled with cutesy emojis. Ignoring the sickening churn in my stomach, I grabbed my phone and dialed Emily's number. It rang unanswered, each unanswered ring chipping away at the fragile hope I clung to. With trembling hands, I relayed the information to the search team, a newfound urgency lacing their voices. Here's hoping that tiny phone, a symbol of my supposed overindulgence, would be the key to bringing Emily home. An hour stretched into what felt like a lifetime. Then, a crackle of static on the walkie-talkie shattered the tense silence. A voice, rough with relief, announced, "We found her. She's safe and sound." Moments later, the front door burst open, revealing a group of rescuers carrying a small, bundled figure. Emily, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but safe. Alive. My in-laws engulfed her in a hug, tears streaming down their faces. I joined the embrace, burying my face in her hair, the scent of pine needles and fresh air a balm to my soul. When we finally pulled back, I looked into Emily's bright brown eyes. "Why didn't you answer your phone, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. She shrugged, a hint of defiance in her small voice. "I was scared it would die," she explained. "So I just stayed put and waited for them to find me on the GPS thing." 8 years old, and already displaying a wisdom that put her father to shame. Shame that simmered into a white-hot rage as I glanced at Michael, who stood awkwardly to the side, a ghost at his own daughter's homecoming party. "Well, aren't you going to say something?" I spat, my voice laced with venom. "Welcome home, sweetheart? Glad you're not lost in the wilderness anymore?" Michael flinched at my words, but remained silent. Emily, sensing the animosity, wriggled out of my embrace and walked towards him. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, but clear. "Why did you leave me all alone in the mountains?" Michael's lips stretched into a thin, unconvincing smile. "Just a little test, champ," he mumbled, his voice strained. "See how brave you are." Emily, for an 8-year-old, displayed a maturity that belied her age. She tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. "No," she corrected. "You left me on purpose." A choked laugh escaped Michael's lips. "Don't be silly, kiddo. Why would I do that?" "Because you don't like me," she stated bluntly, her voice devoid of accusation, simply a fact. "You never wanted me." My breath hitched in my throat. The truth, raw and unfiltered, hung heavy in the air. Michael's face flushed crimson, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "That's not true," he blustered, his voice laced with desperation. "You're just a stupid kid, making stuff up." "Don't call me stupid," Emily retorted, her small frame bristling with defiance. Martha, ever the peacemaker, intervened. "Michael, that's enough," she snapped, her voice surprisingly firm. "Let Emily speak." Michael opened his mouth to protest, but a withering look from his father silenced him. "Emily, darling," George said, his voice gentle. "Can you tell us what happened?" Emily, emboldened by her grandfather's support, reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, the very phone I'd given her as a secret gift. "I have proof," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. With a few taps on the screen, a voice filled the room. A woman's voice, sweet and seductive, cooing into the phone. It was a conversation Emily had cleverly recorded. "Don't worry, honey," the voice purred. "Soon, we'll be together. Just get rid of her, permanently." The blood drained from my face. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the chilling silence that followed. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My father-in-law turned to Michael, his face etched with a mixture of disappointment and fury. "What does this mean, son?" Michael, cornered and defeated, crumpled to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The carefully constructed facade crumbled, revealing the truth in all its ugliness. He confessed everything, a sordid tale of a desperate affair and a ruthless ambition. His mistress, he revealed, was pregnant with his son, an heir, the one he'd always craved. But she wouldn't marry him, not while he had a wife and a child who would eat into his finances with alimony payments. They'd hatched a monstrous plan, to remove the obstacle standing in their way, Emily. Fury, a primal and unforgiving beast, roared through me. The man I'd shared my life with, the man who'd held my hand at the altar, was a monster in disguise. My voice, when I finally found it, was a low growl. "Police," I spat, grabbing my phone. "Now." Michael lunged for me, his voice thick with desperation. "Paloma, please. You don't understand." The sirens wailed in the distance, a mournful symphony heralding justice, however delayed. As the officers swarmed into the house, Michael crumpled to the floor, his pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. The following weeks were a blur of police interviews, lawyers, and court appearances. Emily, bless her brave heart, held her ground. She recounted the events in the mountains, her voice steady and unwavering as she exposed her father's cruelty. The recording on her phone, a testament to his monstrous plan, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The trial was a media frenzy. Michael and his mistress, a viper with painted nails and a heart as cold as ice, pointed fingers at each other, each desperate to shift the blame. Their lies, however, were as flimsy as tissue paper against the weight of evidence. Justice, though slow, did prevail. Michael and his mistress were found guilty of attempted murder. The judge, a stern woman with steely eyes, slammed them with a hefty sentence. They would spend years behind bars, a small price to pay for the monstrous act they'd planned. As for financial compensation, it was a hollow victory. Money couldn't erase the scars etched upon my soul, the fear that had choked me in the agonizing hours of Emily's disappearance. Yet, it served as a symbolic punishment, a reminder of the life they'd so heartlessly tried to extinguish. Perhaps the most satisfying blow came from Michael's own family. Martha and George, their faces etched with a profound disappointment, publicly disowned their son. They stood by me and Emily, their unwavering support a balm to our wounded hearts. Emily and I moved away, leaving behind the ghosts of the past. It wasn't easy. There were nightmares that clawed at my sleep. But with each sunrise, with each shared laugh with Emily, the shadows receded. And as I held Emily close, the warmth of her small body a beacon of hope, I knew one thing for certain: a mother's love, fierce and unwavering, could conquer even the most monstrous betrayals. The aroma of simmering tomato sauce and garlic infused the air of La Famiglia, our family restaurant, a symphony of scents that always soothed my soul. John, my husband for 3 decades, sat across from me, meticulously folding his napkin into a geometric origami masterpiece. "Honey," I said, tucking a wayward strand of hair behind my ear, "you've been working late an awful lot these past few weeks. Everything all right at the hotel expansion?" John looked up, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features, before he settled into his usual confident smile. "Just some loose ends, nothing major. You know how it gets." We knew all right. Our entire lives were woven into the fabric of Isabella and John Incorporated. La Famiglia, the cozy corner hotel next door, and our chain of laundromats, all testaments to our shared dreams, countless arguments, and the relentless march of time. We were a team, a well-oiled machine that had weathered every storm life threw our way. Or at least, that's what I thought. "Maybe delegate some of it," I suggested, swirling the ruby red wine in my glass. "We have a great team, remember?" John chuckled, the sound lacking its usual warmth. "Relax, love. Everything's under control. Besides," he leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a husky whisper, "I might have a surprise for you soon." Intrigue sparked in my chest, momentarily pushing aside the nagging suspicion that had been growing like a weed in my gut. "A surprise, huh? Don't leave me hanging." John winked, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Not just yet. Let's just say you deserve a little R&R after slaving away for all these years." The following weeks were a flurry of activity. John orchestrated everything: flights, reservations, even hiring extra help at the laundromats. The surprise, it turned out, was a solo trip for me. A whole month in South Africa, a country I'd dreamt of visiting for years. Just you and some well-deserved relaxation, John had explained, his eyes holding a warmth that had been absent lately. No work, no worries, just you and the breathtaking scenery. The day of my departure arrived. John, looking oddly nervous, helped me into the cab. As I pulled away from the curb, I cast a final glance at our house, bathed in the golden hues of the afternoon sun. South Africa unfolded like a breathtaking tapestry before me. I documented it all on social media, a relentless stream of photos chronicling my solo journey. Back home, John's missing you texts felt hollow, but I pushed it down, attributing it to the stress of running the businesses alone. Finally, after a month of exhilarating freedom, I came back home, ready to return to the familiar rhythm of life. Stepping off the plane, the first thing I did was switch on my phone. A torrent of messages flooded my inbox, friends oohing and awing over my pictures, John's usual "welcome back" text conspicuously absent. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Dismissing it as jet lag, I hailed a cab and headed home. The familiar street, lined with towering oak trees, brought a wave of comfort. But as I approached the house, a sickening feeling washed over me. My key wouldn't turn in the lock. Panic clawed at my throat. I jiggled the handle, shoved the key in again, frustration building with each failed attempt. Finally, pulling out my phone, I dialed John's number. It rang once, twice, then a cold voice answered the phone. "Hello? John, it's me, Isabella," I stammered, my voice tight with confusion. Why won't my key open the door? A beat of silence followed, then a sigh. Isabella. Look, there's no easy way to say this. John's voice, usually warm and comforting, was flat and emotionless. I sold the house. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sold the house? What are you talking about? My voice cracked with disbelief. Without even discussing it with me? Another sigh, tinged with what sounded like annoyance. There's a lot to unpack here, honey. Look, the truth is, I filed for divorce. We need to split things up. The phone almost slipped from my grasp. Divorce? John, what are you saying? Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. We've been married for 30 years. I know, honey, I know, John said, his voice softening a touch. But things change. I met someone, younger, and well. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The truth, ugly and raw, slammed into me. The missing texts, John's distant behavior, it all clicked into horrifying place. Someone younger, huh? I repeated, my voice laced with bitterness. And who might that be? Another pause, this time filled with an uncomfortable tension. It doesn't matter, Isabella. The important thing is, we need to move forward. The business will be split in half. You get the laundromats, and I'll keep La Famiglia and the hotel. The laundromats? That's all I get? Fury bubbled up inside me, hot and volatile. After all these years? The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in the parking lot, the phone clutched in my hand like a useless relic. With trembling hands, I knocked on the door, the one that no longer belonged to me. This time it swung open a moment later. Standing in the doorway, a smug smile plastered across her face, was a woman I vaguely recognized, John's secretary, Sarah, clad in a skirt that defied the laws of physics and a top that screamed, bought on impulse. She looked like a caricature of everything I wasn't, young, blonde, and possessing a kind of airhead confidence that grated on my nerves. Isabella, she drawled, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. John mentioned you were coming back today. Where is he? I demanded, voice tight with barely contained anger. Sarah's smile widened, a touch too sharp around the edges. Out celebrating our new life, of course. But before you get any ideas, she added, her tone turning pointed, this house belongs to me now. She flourished a key in front of my face, the glint of metal mocking me. And him too, I suppose, I spat, unable to hold back the bitterness that stained my voice. Sarah's smile faltered for a second, a flicker of something akin to disgust crossing her heavily made-up face. but it was quickly replaced by a smug grin. "Thanks for the well wishes, honey," she said, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness. "Don't you dare call me honey. Gold digger," I growled, pushing past her into the house. The familiar space, once a haven of comfort, now felt alien. John's belongings had vanished, replaced by cheap, gaudy furniture that screamed Sarah's gaudy taste. Sarah's carefully constructed facade crumbled. Her eyes narrowed, and a vicious glint replaced the fake sweetness. "Watch your mouth, old lady," she hissed, her voice surprisingly low and dangerous. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Sarah broke the silence, her voice regaining its saccharine quality. "Look, honey," she said, feigning concern. "The cops are on their way to escort you out. John wouldn't want any trouble." "The cops?" I scoffed, disbelief momentarily overriding my anger. "This is my house." "Not anymore, sweetie," Sarah purred, stepping closer. "Now get out before I have you removed." With a last glare at Sarah, I stormed out of the house, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. Tears stung my eyes, a mixture of hurt and anger threatening to spill over. But I wouldn't give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing me cry. John might have taken the house, but he wouldn't break me. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone, the screen illuminating my tear-streaked face. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a lifeline thrown across the miles. It was Ethan, my son, the architect building his own life in another city. Hearing his familiar voice, rough with sleep but laced with concern, was a balm on the rawness of my emotions. Tears streamed down my face as I poured out the story, John's betrayal, the house, the whole damn mess. Ethan's stunned silence was almost deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with anger. "That old fool. Don't worry, Mom, I'm on the next flight. I'll kick his sorry but myself." A smile, tinged with sadness, touched my lips. "Thanks, honey, that means the world. But I can handle this. It's my fight." We talked for a while longer, his unwavering support a warm ember against the chill of betrayal. I rented a hotel room for a while. Sleep, however, was a stranger that night. My mind raced, fueled by anger and a sliver of hope. By morning, a plan had taken root, a fierce determination replacing the despair. The lawyer's office was a sterile haven of paperwork and legal jargon. Together, we unearthed the truth. John, in his haste, had forged my signature on the house sale documents. His little trick of selling the house to his mistress, Sarah, wouldn't hold water. The courtroom was a tense battleground. When the judge ruled in my favor, returning the house to me and splitting the business fairly, a wave of relief washed over me. It wasn't a complete victory, the laundromats paled in comparison to the hotel and restaurant John kept, but it was a start. The key felt heavy and satisfying in my hand as I approached the house. The front door swung open before I could even knock. There they stood, John and Sarah, faces stormy with frustration. John opened his mouth to speak, but the words died on his lips. "Shouldn't you two lovebirds be somewhere else celebrating your new life?" I asked, my voice laced with steely sarcasm. John sputtered, his face morphing between rage and disbelief. Sarah, her carefully applied makeup cracking, threw me a venomous look. "You won't get away with this," she hissed. I simply shrugged. "Actually, honey, I already have." 2 months had passed since the courthouse victory, and tonight, I was the guest of honor at the annual City Hope Charity Gala. Stepping out of the limousine, I took a deep breath, the cool night air tingling on my skin. Diamonds sparkled at my throat, a glittering shield against lingering vulnerability. Then I saw them. John and Sarah, a grotesque tableau of arrogance in the doorway. "Isabella," John drawled, his voice dripping with a false cordiality that made me want to spit. Looking, well. He didn't actually believe that, of course. Revenge, a dish best served cold, simmered in my veins. "John," I replied, my voice cool and controlled. "Try harder." He opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off. "Don't worry," I said, my gaze flickering to Sarah. "You have each other now. A perfect match of shallowness." John's smile faltered for a second, then he puffed out his chest. "At least I have a young wife," he declared loudly, his voice aimed more at the gathering crowd than me. "Someone beautiful, unlike—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A flicker of anger sparked within me. Time for a little public education. As I was escorted towards the stage, the microphone felt heavy in my hand, a weapon more potent than any diamond. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "Many of you know me as a businesswoman, but tonight, I want to share a different story, a story about betrayal, resilience, and ultimately, hope." Taking a deep breath, I recounted the events of the past few months, the locked door, the forged signature, the fight for what was rightfully mine. A hush fell over the audience, their eyes glued to me. "And that's why," I concluded, my voice steady, "I've decided to use my experience to help other women caught in similar situations. Tonight, I'm announcing the launch of the Isabella Foundation, a safe haven for women facing financial hardship due to divorce or separation." The room erupted in applause, a wave of support washing over me. John, his face flushed with humiliation, shrunk back into the shadows. Sarah, her carefully constructed facade crumbling, looked like a storm cloud about to burst. The charity gala had been a turning point. John and Sarah slunk away like scolded puppies, but their defeat was far from sweet. The next few days were a living hell. My phone buzzed incessantly with a barrage of vile texts from Sarah, each message a venomous attack on my looks, my age, anything she could dredge up to try and hurt me. Ignoring the digital bile, I called John. "Get your mistress under control," I demanded, my voice laced with steel. John's response was a cold laugh. "You made your bed, Isabella. Now lie in it." That callous response was all the confirmation I needed. John wasn't just content with leaving me, he actively wanted to see me fail. Fine. Two could play that game. John had kept the flashier La Famiglia restaurant, while I ended up with the chain of laundromats. Not exactly a fair split, but I wasn't about to let it break me. Digging deep, I sold a few of the less profitable laundromats. With the cash, I did some intel gathering and discovered that surprise, Sarah was now managing La Famiglia. A slow smile spread across my face. It was time for some good old-fashioned competition. Right next door to La Famiglia, a dusty old diner was up for sale. It wasn't much to look at, but the location was perfect. This was going to be my redemption song. The diner underwent a metamorphosis. Gone were the greasy booths and chipped mugs. In its place emerged a vibrant, modern eatery, Isabella's Kitchen. I poached most of John's best staff. Turns out, they weren't exactly thrilled about working for a screeching banshee like Sarah. I knew La Famiglia's weaknesses: overpriced, outdated menu, and terrible online presence. Isabella's Kitchen offered a fresh, seasonal menu at competitive prices. We launched a sleek website with online ordering and a generous loyalty program. The grand opening was a roaring success. The place buzzed with energy, a stark contrast to the gloomy silence next door. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. Customers who used to frequent La Famiglia for lack of options now had a superior choice. Sarah, predictably, showed up at my door, a screeching harpy, demanding to see a manager. The security guard, a burly ex-marine I'd hired, took one look at her and politely suggested she take a hike. A year later, La Famiglia was a boarded-up shell, a testament to John's poor taste in both mistresses and business partners. As for me, Isabella's Kitchen was thriving, a beacon of success built on the ashes of betrayal. John, if you were listening, this one's for you. Never underestimate a woman scorned. A few months later, Ethan, my architect son, burst into my office, a glint of mischief in his eyes. We'd grown closer since my whole rebirth ordeal, and his visits were always a welcome break from the daily grind. This time, though, the news he carried was unusual. "Mom," he began, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Guess what the city's planning?" "Spill it, kiddo," I said, putting down my pen, intrigued by the hushed tone. "They're building a sewage treatment plant right next to Dad's fancy hotel." A slow smile crept across my face. John, bless his clueless heart, had poured all his remaining money into that hotel. It was his pride and joy, the last bastion of his successful post-divorce life. This little tidbit from Ethan, however, felt like the universe handing me a golden ticket. "Are you sure?" I asked, wanting to confirm the sweet, sweet karma. "Positive," Ethan grinned. "Saw the blueprints myself. Apparently, it's prime location for these treatment things. Not exactly the view Dad was banking on for his luxury experience." The image of tourists lounging by a pool while the aroma of raw sewage wafted through the air was enough to make me snort with laughter. "Should I tip him off?" Ethan asked, a mischievous glint in his eyes. The temptation was strong. But I remembered the abuse his mistress had hurled at me, and the pity disappeared from my heart. "Nah," I said, a steely glint entering my own eyes. "Let him stew in his own ignorance. This one's on him." John, ever the gambler, had also taken out a hefty loan to expand the hotel, further tying himself to the sinking ship. The news about the sewage plant hit the local news a few months later, causing a predictable public outcry. Tourists canceled reservations in droves, and John's once gleaming hotel became a ghost town. One morning, I woke up to news that the hotel had officially shut down. John, drowning in debt and a bitter taste of defeat, had vanished. My heart didn't exactly do a victory dance. After all, the man was still the father of my son, but a sense of quiet satisfaction settled in. Karma, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. Isabella's kitchen, meanwhile, was thriving. Life, it seemed, had a funny way of balancing the scales. John may have gotten his young wife, but I got the last laugh, and a thriving business, to boot. As I raised a glass of champagne in celebration that night, I silently toasted to a future filled with delicious food, loyal customers, and the sweet taste of well-deserved revenge. Isabella's kitchen wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was my muse. The anger that fueled its creation had morphed into a deep passion for creating a unique dining experience. The real joy came from the happy faces around the tables, the satisfied murmurs about the food, the buzz of conversation that filled the air each night. Ethan, my ever-supportive son, saw this shift in me. He knew the story behind the restaurant, but also saw the potential it held. "Mom," he said one day, his eyes gleaming with a familiar architect's fire, "have I ever shown you my crazy ideas for expanding Isabella's kitchen?" "Crazy?" I asked, intrigued. Ethan had a wild streak when it came to design, a quality I both admired and feared in equal measure. He pulled out a tablet, his finger flying across the screen. What unfolded was a vision that left me speechless. The existing building would be incorporated into a new, modern structure that defied categorization. Glass walls offered diners panoramic views of the city, while the rooftop transformed into a lush, open-air garden complete with cascading waterfalls and hidden nooks. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a bold statement that screamed Isabella's kitchen. "Whoa, kiddo," I breathed, a grin splitting my face. "That's insane." "Exactly," Ethan grinned back. "We can create an experience, Mom. Not just a place to eat, but a destination." We dove headfirst into the project. The construction phase was a whirlwind of activity, the constant hum of machinery a soundtrack to my excitement. Finally, the day arrived, the grand reopening of Isabella's Kitchen 2.0. The reaction was beyond anything I could have imagined. Journalists clamored for interviews, bloggers dubbed it the city's new architectural landmark, and customers lined up around the block for a chance to experience the transformed space. Business boomed, reservations became a necessity, and the success was intoxicating. As for John, well, rumors swirled that Sarah, the young gold digger, had finally gotten bored and flown the coop. He was apparently drowning in debt and, according to Ethan, had become a social pariah. Months melted into a blur of activity. Isabella's Kitchen 2.0 was a runaway success, the reservations booked solid weeks in advance. Ethan, my ever-enthusiastic partner in crime, was a whirlwind of ideas, constantly brainstorming new locations and menu concepts. The dream of a restaurant chain, once a distant flicker, was now a very real possibility. One crisp autumn afternoon, however, the past came knocking on my door, quite literally. It was John, looking like a deflated balloon, his once polished suit hanging off him like ill-fitting armor. The arrogance that used to define him was gone, replaced by a weary desperation. "Isabella," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" "What do you want, John?" My voice was cool, devoid of the anger that used to simmer just beneath the surface. He shuffled in uninvited, his eyes darting around the tastefully decorated foyer. I need your help." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. This man, who had betrayed me, lied to me, and tried to take everything I had, now expected me to be his savior. "Help?" I echoed, my voice laced with disbelief. "After everything you've done?" John slumped onto a nearby chair, the bravado completely gone. "I messed up, Isabella," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Big time. Sarah left me high and dry, the hotel's gone belly up, and I'm drowning in debt." A part of me, a very small part, felt a flicker of pity. But mostly, I felt a cold satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had a hefty right hook. "So you want what?" I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy. "A handout? A loan?" John shook his head, a flicker of something like shame crossing his face. "No. I miss you. I miss the life we had." The laugh that escaped my lips was devoid of humor. "That life is gone, John. And you blew it up yourself." He looked like a kicked dog, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "There's nothing I can do for you, John," I said finally, my voice firm. "You need to make your own bed now, and lie in it." He stood up slowly, defeat etched on his face. "I understand," he mumbled, shuffling towards the door. I wanted you to know I was sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix things, John," I said, the last vestige of pity evaporating. "It never did." He nodded, his face a mask of misery, and stepped out into the cool afternoon air. I watched him go, a strange sense of peace settling over me. Life, it seemed, had a funny way of working itself out. Standing there, the scent of success swirling around me, I knew one thing for certain: never give up on yourself, fight for what's yours, and never underestimate the power of a good revenge dish, served piping hot with a side of self-made success.